Hello and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins. My name is Laura, and in today's video I am doing a tier ranking of the Stephen King books that I have read thus far. So I have 22 books here, and I sort of cheated by also including the novellas of his that I have read, but you know, it's my video, my rules, so I chose to include those. And let's just get right to it because I am so proud of the names of the tiers that I came up with because each of them are a famous, popular line from different books of his. So top tier, 5-star books. This is called Shine On, which of course is a reference to The Shining. And then 4-star books are We All Float Here, which of course is It. And then SSDD, this is something from Dreamcatcher, and it stands for Same Shit, Different Day. And it's a phrase that the friend group in Dreamcatcher are constantly saying to each other. And so considering 3 stars as sort of like the middle of the road tier, I thought SSDD was very fitting for that. 2-star books are called Dirty Bird. This is a reference to Misery because Annie Wilkes likes to call Paul and other people a dirty bird. And then 1-star books, that tier is called Dead is Better. So yeah, I know I already said this, but I'm just so proud of these tier names. I thought about this for like over a week. I've known I want to film this video, so I was like, what am I gonna call the tiers? And I went through different ideas before finally having a stroke of genius and coming up with these. I just think they're so good and so perfect. But anyway, let's just get right to the rankings. So the first one we have here is Gerald's Game. And so I read this and I watched the movie with the intent of filming a book versus movie video, but this book deals with a topic that I have a really hard time reading, which is child sexual abuse. And so in the video, after I went through, I was about to edit, I felt like I came across so uncomfortable talking about this topic. And so I never finished editing. I never posted that video. So that is a trigger warning for people. It's just when it's talked about in detail, which I feel like I'm not unique in that respect, right? Like when that topic is talked about in too much detail, I have a hard time reading books like that. And this one, maybe some people would say it's not that bad, but for me, it was a bit much. But having said that, my bigger issue with this book though, ultimately, and why I'm going to put it on a lower tier is because the ending. So I mean, it's either on the low side of SSDD or the high side of Dirty Bird. I think I'll put it on SSDD because the majority of the book, well, you know what? I don't want to be too generous because I feel like so many books are gonna be in the top tiers. Let's just be honest. So maybe I'll be a bit more critical just so we have some books landing in the lower tiers. But this one, the premise is fascinating, right? Like a woman handcuffed to a bed. And how is she going to get out, right? And so it makes me think of Stephen King in Misery. He talks about playing the game Can I, where your character is in an impossible situation and the author needs to figure out, like, can I get them out of this situation in a way that makes sense? It was a very engaging book and I was on the edge of my seat wanting to know what would happen. But it also deals with a difficult topic, like I said, so there's that, which is just hard for me personally to read. And then on top of that, the ending was terrible. The last quarter of this book, it suddenly feels like it's a totally different book and it's so out of place. And so this book could have ended, 3/4 of the way through because the ending just kind of fell apart and it feels like he should have just turned that ending into a novella because he had this whole other idea and the book just went on this whole different direction that just didn't fit with what we'd been reading throughout Gerald's Game, and I just hated that last section. I will say I did love the movie, and the movie, they fixed the ending. Well, not really. The ending of the movie also feels kind of out of place, and yet in some ways they did make it better than the book, but the performances are fantastic in that movie. But anyway, that's my long-winded way of saying that this one will go in Dirty Bird. And then we have It. This is one of the more recent ones I read, and very fitting, I'm putting it in We All Float Here. So I know this is a 5-star book for a lot of people, and while I did love it, I feel like for one, having it be about 7 kids was just a bit too much because the children, when they're kids, having these different experiences with Pennywise and stuff, it started to feel a bit repetitive, and it was just like, oh, here's this person's scary experience, and here's this person's, and I feel like it could have been like 5 kids, not 7. So that's one reason why I'm putting it here. I would give it 4 or 4.5. So just because I'm not putting it in the top tier, obviously doesn't mean I didn't like it because it was fantastic. It was gripping. It was scary. It was over 1,000 pages. And yet, yeah, every time I sat down to read it, I was looking forward to it and I was totally immersed. But then, we do have the end scene with Bev, and Plenty of people have talked about it, but I feel like that too is gonna bring it down a half a star, if not more, because it was just so weird and unnecessary. So anyway, yeah, it's going in We All Float Here. And then Secret Window, this is a novella. This one is definitely Dirty Bird. I guess it's not Dead is Better. Maybe that's a bit too harsh. But this one, like, it's fine. Yeah, the movie stars Johnny Depp, and I do enjoy the movie, but I guess I don't have too much to say about this one. It's just very, like, okay. I do have a book versus movie video for this, and Ink to Film joined me for it. This was our first collaboration, so you should definitely check out our video. But yeah, I'm sticking it in Dirty Bird. And then The Mist. So this one, I'm tempted to put this in Dirty Bird too, but maybe that's too low. I'll put it in SSDD because I did enjoy this one. It didn't captivate me as much as I wanted, and I almost felt detached while reading this novella for some reason. And then the movie is better here because the movie ending, it is shocking, whereas the book just kind of fizzles out. And Stephen King, I think he has also said that he likes what the movie did with this. And so in general, the movie is better than the book in this case. But yeah, the book, I'll stick it in SSDD. Shawshank Redemption. I'm honestly tempted to put it in SSDD, but it would go in front of The Mist. Maybe that's too low, but I feel like I'm thinking that's too low just because I know how many people love this book, and especially the movie, right? People will list this movie as their all-time favorite, but while I really liked the movie and I liked the book, it didn't impact me in that deep way that it has for so many. So now I'm thinking maybe it should go in We All Float because, I don't know, I'll stick it in the top of SSDD. So that's where it's going. And I do have a book versus movie for this if you want to see it. I have a book versus movie for a lot of these, by the way. But anyway, next up we have Dr. Sleep, and I love Dr. Sleep. That one is going in We All Float Here. It's not a 5-star book, but it was fantastic. And also, like, it's a sequel to The Shining that was published decades later. And so going into it, I sort of was thinking maybe Stephen King just wrote that as a cash grab, right? Having a sequel to The Shining all these years later. And yet it was incredible, and I highly recommend it. Again, I have a book versus movie video for it, so don't dismiss it just because it came out so much later. And then we have On Writing, and this is going in Shine On. I have no issues with this book. Half of it is kind of a memoir, and then the other half is him giving writing advice. And so it is the only nonfiction book here, so it is different in that respect. But yeah, I loved hearing about his life, and then I also loved hearing about his writing process and the advice he gives to writers. And yeah, I loved this one. Then we have The Green Mile. This one I'll also put in We All Float Here. I read this in 2019, so it has been a little while, and I'm curious, when I reread it, I'm curious if I would like it better, but I definitely liked it a lot. I'm trying to think if I would put it ahead of either of these two, but I feel like because it's been 5 years, I shouldn't put it too high since I can't say without a doubt that it belongs up there. But yeah, I'll stick it in We All Float Here. And I definitely do, like I said, I want to reread this. I want to do an official book versus movie video. I read that back before Why the Book Wins existed. I started this in 2020. But anyway, but yeah, from what I remembered, I definitely loved that one. Then we have Dreamcatcher, which fittingly enough, this is going in SSDD because I do like this book and I was fully engaged, which most Stephen King books, he's great at getting you engaged in the story, and it's so immersive and you get so attached to the characters. His character development is always fantastic. And so yeah, certain things about this book I think are incredibly well done, but then other things I feel like were a bit too weird and hard to make sense of. I would put it ahead of The Mist though. And to actually make a correction here, I forgot when I was talking about this book that I actually wasn't totally engaged the whole time, because whenever we were following the character of Kurtz, I was not a fan. I did not find those parts very interesting, and the character of Kurtz, I just wasn't a fan of. In either book or movie, I just didn't like his character or the way he was written. So along with some things being a bit too weird, that was another issue I had with this book. Yeah, I guess SSDD. That'll be where that one goes. Dolores Claiborne. This book is fantastic. This is one that I feel like is one of Stephen King's best that I don't often hear people talk about as being his best, but it is incredible. I would highly recommend it. It is also written in a unique way where it's sort of just a woman talking, and that's how it's written. It's just her being interviewed, but we don't get the questions of the interviewer. We're just getting like her audio kind of a thing. So it's very unique in that respect. Also, the story is just incredible. And Dolores, she is an amazing character. And this one, I guess light spoilers, but this one also deals with child abuse, and yet it's not written about in a direct way. It's just referenced. And so I appreciated that too, that we didn't get those details because I don't want those details. But yeah, this book is incredible. So, I mean, On Writing will probably be on the bottom end of Shine On, so I'll probably stick the fiction books ahead of that one. But yeah, I love Dolores Claiborne. 11/22/63. No surprise here, Shine On. This one is fantastic. And yeah, this is a great one for people to read who don't like horror, because while there are some disturbing things that happen, it's not a horror book. And yeah, it's fantastic. I love it. And I also love the way he wrote about the time travel here too. I really liked that. So yeah, highly recommend. And then The Girl Who Loves Tom Gordon. This one is also going in SSDD. I guess it would be In Front of the Mist. But I have fond memories with this one because it was the first Stephen King book I ever read when I was a teenager. And it is a great one for if you have like younger kids or nephews or, nieces, whoever. Kids who want to read Stephen King, this is a great one for them to start out with because there's like no adult content. That's about a girl who gets lost in the woods and her trying to survive. But then of course there's also a little bit of supernatural horror going on. But again, it's very mild compared to some of his other work while still being effective. So yeah, SSDD I think is fair. And then Billy Summers, I know some people really like this one, but honestly, I'm putting it in Dirty Bird. Like probably, I don't know, I guess top of Dirty Bird is fine. Although maybe I like Gerald's Game better. I don't know. I'll put it before Gerald's Game, actually. But yeah, this one, so the start of it was reminding me a lot of 11/22/63, while not being as good as 11/22/63. And then I just didn't like the direction this went in, and ultimately, yeah, I just felt disappointed. Yeah, I didn't love it. I'm putting it in Dirty Bird. And then Duma Key, so this one I read because this is one I would frequently see people talk about as being one of Stephen King's best books, and yet it being one of the most underrated. So that's why I read it, and I did really like it. I think, honestly, We All Float Here, that seems kind of high for it because I did like it, but I don't know. I read this one a couple of years ago. I don't remember how many stars I gave it. I guess it would go in We All Float Here because I feel like SSDD is too low for that one. But yeah, this one deals with an artist, which I don't know if Stephen King has ever written about before. But yeah, I thought the premise was really cool. And while it's not that scary, he does have some great imagery here. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like We All Float Here might be a bit too high for it, but that's where I'll stick it. I think that's fine. And then The Shining, of course, considering the sweater I am wearing, no surprise. This is one of my favorite Stephen King's books. It is fantastic. I have a book versus movie for it. I want to reread this. It's been a while, but ever since I finished it, I've wanted to go back and reread it, but there's just so much Stephen King to choose from, right? So I often will just go back to a new one rather than reread one because he has like over 60 books. But I do want to reread this because it is just fantastic. The Dead Zone, I liked this one a lot too. We All Float Here. If you like 11/22/63, then you should read The Dead Zone because The Dead Zone doesn't deal with time travel, but it does have its own supernatural powers going on. And it also deals with politics, so that's kind of similar. And it also is similar to 11/22/63 in that we get large chunks that are just kind of like slice of life, a day in the life of this character, right? And the people he meets along the way, and it's very episodic in some ways. And so yeah, I loved this one. And if you like 11/22/63 or even Billy Summers, you should definitely check out The Dead Zone. And it was also Stephen King's first bestseller. So fun fact. Next up is the only Richard Bachman book I have read, and that is The Regulators. And I really liked The Regulators. I think I'll put it in maybe the top of SSDD. So this one, it's kind of like that Twilight Zone episode where the kid has powers and he controls his household and he's obsessed with like cartoons and stuff. At least I'm basing it off of my memory of the Twilight Zone movie from the 70s or 80s. That section of that movie about the kid who controls his household, that terrified me for so long. That was like the scariest story in that anthology, in my opinion, as a child. Yeah, it was very scary. And so we get a similar premise here. Yeah, I really liked it. The sister novel is Desperation. I've been meaning to read that ever since finishing The Regulators, and I keep putting it off. It's also, I have it right here, but it's also really thick too. So, and there's no movie to watch for it. So it would have to be one I'm reading just for fun. And so I keep putting it off. But anyway, so yeah, I really like The Regulators. Next up, we have Salem's Lot. This one, this might be controversial, but I'm putting it behind Dr. Sleep. I did love this one, but Dr. Sleep just really got me emotionally. Like that book made me cry, whereas Salem's Lot, I love that book. I would highly recommend it. And Stephen King, he puts his own twist on the classic Dracula story, and Dracula by Bram Stoker is what inspired him to write this one. And so he was heavily inspired by that book. But yeah, the characters, I definitely loved the characters, and there were a few that I grew attached to. And yet I do have my complaints with the book. My book versus movie has been posted. You can go check that out. But yeah, so I loved this one. It's going in We All Float. But yeah, Dr. Sleep and it, I would say I definitely liked better. And then we have Firestarter. I'm tempted to put this in SSDD because it was fine. You know what? Maybe I'll put it actually in Dirty Bird, which that seems kind of low, but I'm having a hard time remembering the details of this one though. And so that's why I'm putting it lower, because I read it just a couple years ago. And yet as I'm thinking about it, I'm having a hard time remembering it. So the fact that it didn't make much of an impression on me, I feel like it shouldn't be put that high. Again, I have a book versus movie for this. I compared the book with both movies that have been made. I think I spoke positively of it in that video. And yet now after a couple years, I don't remember too much about it. So it's going in Dirty Bird. And then Pet Sematary. I loved Pet Sematary. Yeah, I'm putting it right here. This one, fantastic. The ending, I was so shocked by, but it's just incredible. It's so sad and it's very dark and depressing in many ways. But now I'm thinking maybe it should be, no. It's going above 11/22/63. So yeah, anyway, book versus movie for that is also relatively recent. So you should check it out. I'm really happy with how that video in particular turned out. I think I did a really good job on that one. So you should definitely watch it if you have not yet. And then Misery. Misery and Shining are like tied as my favorite. I love Misery so much. Kind of like Gerald's Game. The premise is so simple, and yet he just does so much with such a simple premise, and it's just incredible. I cannot recommend it highly enough. It's so suspenseful, and yet it's also really scary and disturbing, and there's also like deeper meanings to this. Like if you see it on the surface level, it's like a great horror novel, but then it has deeper meanings, and so some of those deeper meanings are what make me like it even more. And then also I've heard people complain about the story within the story here, because we hear about the book Paul is writing, but I loved getting that part too. Not because I necessarily loved the story he was writing, but I think there's just so much symbolism within Misery Returns, the story he is writing within this book. And so yeah, I think the symbolism within that, and maybe I'm applying symbolism that Stephen King didn't intend, I don't know, but yeah, it's this and The Shining are just incredible. Dolores Claiborne, all of these, obviously Shine On, these are all 5-star books. But yeah, anyway, I love Misery. And then Dead is Better. We are putting in Mr. Harrigan's Phone into Dead is Better. So I read this book a few years back intending to do a book versus movie, and then I just never watched the movie. But honestly, I made sure to add this one in the mix because I knew this one would go in Dead is Better, and I knew no other book would. So I was like, I need to put something in the bottom tier. And then I remembered that I read Mr. Harrigan's Phone and I didn't like it. So that's what we're putting down here. So anyway, I wouldn't recommend that one. I have not read the other short stories here. I have only read Mr. Harrigan's Phone. But yeah, It's Going in Dead is better. So yeah, that is my ranking of these 22 Stephen King stories. Let me know how you feel about my ranking. Let me know what you would change. What is your favorite Stephen King book? Also, of the books I have not yet read, what book should I read next by Stephen King? So again, Desperation I want to read. I've heard good things about Rose Madder. Oh, The Stand, of course. I do want to read that. And I would probably do a book versus movie video because I know they've turned it into a mini series, I think. So I would do that. But he just has so many and it's hard to choose between all of them. But anyway, I also want to get into The Dark Tower. But I know with that, there's just like all of these other books you need to read before even getting into the Dark Tower series. Because there's like the extended Dark Tower series where, you know, it and other things are included in it, even though it's not technically part of the Dark Tower. But yeah, so anyway, that is my ranking of these books. Thank you so much for watching. I will have a ranking of Stephen King movies coming up at some point. I don't know when I'll be filming it, but in the next few months, I will film that video. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.